Humans accept the world as the constant reality of the 5 major senses. Sound is not sound unless humans have ears to hear it. Fire is not hot unless our skin warns us of its heat. And the images that are transmitted to our brain through the 2 most easily deceived components of the human machine are real only because our eyes tell us that they are real. But our world is constantly evolving, and with each new discovery, a little more of that surety gets swept away. Can you see the millions of bacteria floating around the deceptively clean surfaces in your kitchen? Can you see every atom that makes you up? What about your soul? Where would that be? Do we walk around the world simply wearing these costumes of blood and bone that we call a body? I never used to think like this. I was a self-proclaimed skeptic. I had no time to put up with other people's silly superstitions and no patience for anything other than that which I could clearly measure. Where did I come from? My parents. Where was I going when I died? Preferably a plot next to them in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I didn't care about anything more than that. Knowing where my next paycheck came from, that was the question that interested me. What was I going to do when the money ran out? These were the deep, philosophical questions that kept me awake at night. Aside from a girlfriend who tried to get me to focus on my immortal soul, I usually kept my distance from the opiate of the masses. Maybe if I'd ever been to church in my life, I might have been more prepared for what happened to me. Maybe. A few years back, I was living in a small apartment complex in Harrisonburg, Virginia. They call it a complex, but I've seen enough slums in my day to know one when I see one. Still, it was a 1-bedroom place for a little more than $400 a month, and most importantly, it was nowhere near JMU. I wanted nothing to do with college kids, and it was the landlord's insistence that they never got any of their traffic back here that finally sold me on the place. My family used to live in Harrisonburg before moving out to Ann Arbor. We moved shortly after I got out of elementary school. My dad always told me we moved to be closer to my Auntie Frida, but I never understood why. So, I figured I'd move back to the old homestead, but the place had long since been sold. The next best thing was an apartment, and, like I say, the price was right. My building was right up against this small patch of woods. Between my back door and the woods proper was this ugly old oak tree that must have been at least 50 feet high. Apparently there was some interesting history about this part of town. Back in the late 70s it had been a road connecting Bridgewater and Harrisonburg, at least that's what the landlord said. He told me there had been a zoning dispute with one of the local farmers or something like that, and eventually the road had to be closed before it was even finished being built. I, of course, figured that was all bullshit. About my 3rd night in the place, I got cabin fever. My stuff was all unpacked, what little there was anyways, and my new job didn't start until the following Monday. I'd moved here from Michigan, didn't have any friends yet, so there really wasn't anything I could do about it. So I did what any mature man would do in a situation like this. I turned on the TV and tried to drown my boredom in a deluge of reality shows, cop dramas, and court TV. I even watched an episode of that god-awful singing competition. I passed out in front of the box around 2 in the morning, but when I woke up, it was still dark out. I checked the clock on my cell phone, and it said it was only 6 a.m. I figured something had disturbed me, and I'd be back asleep any minute. But then I realized my TV was off. This was an old clunker, not the kind that automatically cut itself off, mind you. I'm talking with the flip switch and the radial dials. That's how much of a hand-me-down piece of junk this thing was. I figured maybe it's a power outage. But the switch was in the off position. I flipped it, and it turned on like nothing happened. Well, shoot, maybe I awoke in the middle of the night and turned it off and fell asleep before I could remember. You know, they say that, you do that during the night occasionally with no recollection. Look at the sleepwalkers, for instance. I was about to try and get a few extra hours of sleep when I noticed something else. my front door was wide open. I was able to look right through the thing to stare at that oak tree in those woods. I got up, put my shoes on, and walked over to the door. Well, that's when I pieced things together in my mind, you see. One of my neighbors heard the TV and had taken it upon themselves to come into my house and turn it off. I got on my cell phone and was about to call the police. I'm not sure exactly when I saw him. Well, maybe it is a more accurate term. All I remember is I was scanning the area around my front porch, and I took a few seconds to look down at the oak tree. Something was standing there. It was about my height, and maybe because of the darkness or what, you couldn't properly make it out. I was stupid. I decided I was going to confront this thing, whatever he was. As I started walking towards the oak tree, the damn thing took off running towards the woods. I had the presence of mind to grab a flashlight before heading out of my place, so I turned it on and followed after him in the woods. Like I say, it was stupid. I wasn't even thinking, and I wasn't even sure what I was going to do when I caught the guy. What if he had a gun or something? I lost track of him almost as soon as I got into the woods. What's worse is that, half asleep as I was, I lost track of myself as well. This was midwinter, so there wasn't anything but a thick collection of empty branches, but it did the trick. Within minutes, I was completely disoriented. The wind was picking up now, biting already at my frozen hands, and any woodland scents had already been muted in the frigid air. I told myself to calm down. It would be light soon, and I'd be able to find my way out then. I'd be back at home watching my stupid reality shows in no time, and I would take a trip at Home Depot later that day to buy a few padlocks for the door. I sat down next to a tree to try and keep myself warm. That's when I realized the ground felt funny. Not just wet. I realized that I'd been sitting on what had once been a gravel road. So maybe there was at least one part of the story that was true. I figured, taking the landlord's story at face value, I could just follow the road back to civilization. I started down the path and made it about a mile before I saw my sign. I saw 2 streetlights off in the distance. I tell you, I was delirious with excitement, so much that I just ran right towards them. But they weren't streetlights. I hesitate to call them eyes, exactly. But all I know is I was staring directly into them after only a few feet. I don't remember my feelings. I don't think the human brain is sufficiently capable of processing something on that level. The fear I must have felt at that time is unmeasurable. And yet, looking back, I don't feel anything. But I do remember when the 2 lights flickered ever so slightly to my right. I didn't want to stop looking at those things. I wasn't sure what would happen if I let the thing get out of my sight once more. But eventually, I did look. There was a busted down old bus slammed up against a tree and resting in a ditch beneath a large hill. The metal was rusted and the interior seats were scorched terribly. I looked back to where the being had been standing, but it was gone. Not entirely sure what to do, I slowly moved towards the bus. I figured I'd been led there for some reason, and while I wanted nothing more than to get the hell away from there, there was something I had to do. Can you believe it? Face to face with a ghost or whatever it was, and I'm still trying to bring logic into the situation. There were no bodies on board the bus, and yet something was definitely here. I kept thinking to myself, why would a bus be left out here in the middle of what had once been a main road? Like I said, most of what the landlord told me had just been a story. As I was investigating the bus, and I'll swear on whatever you want me to swear on. The seats were filled with the same black shapes that led me to this place, except they were all smaller, about the size of children. I do remember my panic, but it wasn't panic at the figures that had suddenly shown up, or the fact that I caught a glimpse of the larger one behind the wheel of the bus. It was that, despite not being able to see their faces or bodies, or make them out in any way discernible to the 5 major senses, I knew these people. I knew them from the way they sat in even rows, making sure to fill up every seat precisely. I knew them from the rust on the outside of the bus, which I only now recalling myself. And I knew them from the gap in the ranks near the back of the bus. With the spectral arms, they all pointed to the gap, urging me to move into my position. I screamed, "No!" and ran to the door. I actually ran through that tall figure as it tried to get in my way to stop me. Daylight was streaming through the woods now, and the sun was slowly rising. I turned back to make sure I wasn't being followed, and the bus had vanished. I remembered now why we left Harrisonburg in the first place. I remembered why I knew that the landlord's story was all a lie. I'd been on that bus in the 3rd grade. We were going on a field trip to visit the local farm. The driver must have gotten confused by the gravel road and ended up skidding off the hill, plowing into a tree. I had been the only one in a class of 20 kids who survived the accident. I guess they spent a long time waiting for me to join them, but I'm not ready yet. I don't think I'll ever be ready. And when I do go, I don't want to go with them.